Hello and welcome back to Kvikmyndapod, an Icelandic cinema podcast. I'm Rob Watts, and on this podcast I discuss 21st century Icelandic film with my good friend Ellie Cawthorne. If you're new to the podcast, thanks for listening and for exploring the cinema of my favourite country with us. It's week 3 of series 3, and I promise we'll be firmly back on Icelandic soil soon. I say this because we're covering an exciting and energetic thriller that straddles 2 countries this week, Iceland and the Netherlands. That's right, Ellie and I hopped aboard the good ship Dettifoss along with every male Icelandic actor we've ever seen and smuggled our way through Óskar Jónasson's Reykjavik-Rotterdam from 2008. Before we get stuck in, a reminder that you can join the conversation and see some lovely pictures on Instagram and Twitter where we're at Kvikmyndapod. That's KVIKMYNDAPOD. Please also rate us on Spotify and Apple, it really does help people find us. And if you'd like to help us keep the podcast going, why not bung us the cost of a coffee over on our Ko-fi page, kofi.com/Kvikmyndapod. And so, from coffee to booze.
Hvað veistu mikið? 1000 lítra? Nei. Annar Írisar djúpum skít. Þetta 2000 lítrum í sjóinn. Hvað í gangi? Þú ferð bara ekki túr og kennir hann hvernig á að gera þetta. Ég skítrættu við þetta. Einn túr til Rotterdam.
Bara búið að vera rassía eftir rassía. Það búið að þið okkar einustu helvítisskrufu.
Einu skriðu.
Við verðum lengra stoppi í Rotterdam.
Við þurfum vélabillu.
Hefur ykkur verið eiga vita? Eiga vita, það verður enginn komið nálægt þessu. Já, allar í mig.
Þetta?
Við töluðum að kaupa sjampó. Já, það er líka sápa hérna.
Og hvað þarf að gera við hana?
Að hendi henni í sjóinn.
Þeir rást líka á ykkur, þú er rátt á Íris og strákana.
Íris, halló?
Greinlega brjálaði menn. Ég get alveg sofið inn í nótt að þú vilt.
Hvað er kona mín? Hvað er hún ekki að ríða besta vinuðinu?
Hvernig sem allt fer, getur þú alltaf leitað til mín.
Fucking Icelanders.
Hi Ellie.
Hi Rob, how's it going?
Not so bad, thank you. How are you?
Good. Ready for some fast-paced, boat-based action?
Yeah, this is certainly a much more sort of generic, commercial kind of genre thriller, isn't it, really?
Yeah, when you gave me the DVD, the cover, I thought, oh no, I'm not sure I'm going to be into this. But I actually really enjoyed it, you know. It was an hour and a half that whipped by entertainingly.
Yeah, so we are talking about Reykjavik-Rotterdam this week from 2008, directed by Óskar Jónasson. And basically, it's a Jar City reunion, plus everyone else we've ever seen shoved on board a boat.
It does star pretty... I think everybody in this seems to have been in a different film we've watched in one of our series.
Well, I tell you what's interesting is I've been talking to one of our listeners who has been explaining how it gets a little bit tiring seeing all the same people on TV, in the films, on stage, down the shops. And it's so funny. And her name is Unur. And I think it's just hilarious. We kind of find it funny seeing them all pop up in the 16 films we've covered or whatever it is. But actually, when you see them in real life every day and on TV every day, it must be kind of annoying. I
imagine though that people in Iceland must have a slightly different relationship with celebrities or actors because, as you say, they're everywhere.
Yeah. One
man in particular, Ingvar Sigurðsson.
Yeah, he does pop up a lot. Una was saying how she walked down the road and Ólafur, Darri Ólafsson was just sat in his car, you know, outside City Hall. Of course he was, because these people live in Iceland and work there and, you know, they're just locals.
Love it.
I mean, it's true. We've heard many times, or I've heard many times, if you speak to the right person, they will know anyone you could name, whether that's Björk or Jönssi or whoever. It's like just it's a tiny little city, a tiny little country, and they're all there, aren't they?
Arnaldur Írisar djúpum skít. Þetta 2000 lítrum í sjóinn.
Ég þakkláttur fyrir að geta komið. Ekki bara eitt dag í einu.
Ég veit það ekki. Náttúrulega ég sér þetta á plassa og koma hann út í þetta.
Sjáðu mér fyrir að verða komin hingað. Ég búinn að vera edrú í næstu því ár.
Þú fyrir bara ekki einn túr og kennir hann hvernig á að gera þetta.
Ég bara hef trúið því að það gangi.
Heldur að Íris myndi segja. Já, skilar því?
Ég legg út fyrir þessu. Skiptum 50-50, allir græða. Þú átt fyrir útborgunin nýri.
So, we should probably say who's in this one then. Shall I read out a list of names?
Yeah.
See who you can remember and recognise.
Take us through.
So we've got Baltasar Kormákur,
who we've seen primarily as a director.
That's right. He was the Jar City director and the director of 101 Reykjavik. We haven't seen anything of him since series 1, actually, have we?
No, since we saw him with a lizard on his shoulder.
Nú, sjá hvað þetta... Varstu búin að heyra þetta með Þóri?
Nei, hvað?
Þóri dama.
Ok, flott, já, flott.
Þóri dama, maður. Fyrstu við eigum að umskýra hann.
Umskera hann?
Umskýra hann.
Umskýra hann? Já.
Kannski Þóru?
Já.
Hæ, Þóra.
Ok, flott.
We've also got Ingvar Sigurðsson. He plays Steingrimur. Then, it's just like a list of who's who. We've got Thruster Leo, who was Noe's dad in Noe Albanoe.
Again, a slightly sleazy, good-for-nothing type here.
Sort of. I mean, he holds down a job, so that's slightly more than...
While doing criminal activities on the side, yeah.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Theodor Jónasson, you remember who that is?
As kind of Captain Birdseye here.
Yes.
Of course, we've seen him in a couple of things, haven't we? We've seen him in Jar City as a psychopath.
Yeah.
We've seen him in Rams as Kiddy.
Absolutely. Ólafur Darri Ólafsson, the aforementioned, who we haven't really seen in any real big role. He pops up briefly at the start of Let Me Fall. He's in 101 Reykjavik as Baltasar Kormákur's mate, looking very, very young. But really, he's kind of one of the most recognisable Icelandic actors out there because he's been in a lot of Hollywood stuff. Recently, the TV series The Tourist, I don't know if you saw that on BBC.
Haven't got round to it yet.
It's pretty great, and he is a big man in that. It's a big, scary, kind of gangster kind of guy. But most famous for being the lead actor in Trapped, which we're still waiting on series 3 of over here. And then we've got Jóhannes Haukur Jóhannesson, who plays Eiríkur. Now, did you recognise him?
Yes, from the ghosty one, which the name of which is just from I Remember You, of course. Yeah.
Yes. And he pops up all over the place nowadays. He's in the new Vikings spin-off series, Vikings Valhalla. And he's just sort of pops up everywhere now. Less Icelandic stuff, more, I don't know, international stuff.
Clearly this Reykjavik-Rotterdam was the film to be in if you want to go on to an illustrious career.
It's true. And of course, this was written by Arnaldur Indriðason, co-written the screenplay with the director, who of course wrote the novel and the screenplay for Jar City. So we're on sort of familiar ground here, aren't we? We've got a crime thriller starring everyone we know. Shall I give us a little synopsis?
Please do.
Okay. So, Christopher, a security guard whose family are barely holding it together, but for some kind help from his friend Steingrimur, is tempted back to his smuggling ways when his brother-in-law Arnur fails to deliver drugs to gangster Eiríkur after a trip to Rotterdam on board a cargo ship. Thus ensues a twisty crime caper with as much humour as there is action, as Christopher attempts to smuggle a buttload of alcohol back to Iceland while trying to avoid getting caught by Captain Birdseye.
Very neatly done. Yeah,
Thank
I mean,
you.
that's pretty much it.
It is it, and I've got a note here that says, it's a pretty simple story, but the film is quite complex with its twists and turns and sort of double-crossing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a classic, I don't know if I'd call it an action movie, but a classic thriller crime plot.
Yeah.
There's also quite a good subplot, which I enjoyed. Back home in Iceland. So obviously we have Christopher on his smuggling mission, which obviously goes a bit awry, and we'll maybe talk about that. But at home, there's another subplot unfolding involving his wife, Iris, and his friend, Steingrimur. And I think that actually is quite a nice little subplot as well.
Well, yeah, especially come the end when everything ties together, because it sort of feels like it's running in two parallel straight lines, and they're interesting and fun. But then to see them kind of weave together towards the end was a nice surprise, and I think it works really well.
Like you say, there's quite a lot of humour in there,
yes.
and it could have been a much darker film, and I was actually anticipating a film that took itself much more seriously, but it didn't get too bogged down in its own somberness. It was quite fast-paced and fun, and thrilling, and you did back the characters, I think.
Yeah.
I was like, I really hope the smuggling mission goes well.
Because I had a thought that actually, should we care if Christopher achieves the goal of smuggling all this alcohol back? Because really, he's broken the law in the past. He's gone to jail. This is also breaking the law. And is his situation really that dire that he needs to do it? But actually, I came to the conclusion that it's fine.
People want to get drunk, get some alcohol. No, but I think isn't that the point of any good crime caper, that you're really backing the anti-hero generally. Any heist movie, you want the heist to, Ocean's 11, you want them to steal the money. You don't want them to get caught halfway through.
No,
and it's the same here.
Yeah, exactly. There are just enough stakes here for Christopher because, he's obviously given up his smuggling ways. We know that in the past, he went to jail for getting a whole load of alcohol from Rotterdam back to Iceland, and now his brother-in-law failing to do the same, although we do learn he's trying to smuggle something slightly different back to Iceland. And it's interesting, I think this is quite a commercial film, and it does fit within the whole crime genre in a much more simple way than any film we've really covered on this podcast. Everything's kind of unique, whereas this film is, it could sit amongst a lot of the Hollywood type films. But what does make it Icelandic is that they're smuggling booze back to Iceland.
It seems so low stakes, doesn't it? It seems so kind of provincial.
Yeah, it's like alcohol is just, it's everywhere. And why alcohol? It's legal. B, you can go and buy it. I don't know. It just seems a bit.
I guess you can just make a bit of a markup on it, right? And it's that kind of lowbrow sounds so, not one of the high forms of crime, but you know what I mean? There's loads of crime in the world that is just kind of people trying to fiddle the margins, make a tiny bit more. And if your options are get paid nothing per hour as a security guard, or make a kind of half decent, maybe not even that good, bit of money on the side doing this, fair enough. And I think that's the kind of realm we're working in. We're not working on high-end heists, are we here?
No, we're not. It sort of reminds me of, is it still a thing? But Brits going to France for a booze cruise, going over there, getting the cheap wine and coming back, and then, if you fancied it, selling it on.
I quite enjoyed that side of it, though, that these were just ordinary people, and it did seem like a crime that lots of people could get away with. And even the fact that they knew him as a smuggler. He was known to all the people in the shipping community, and they were just like, oh, well, I guess it's just Christopher, Fine, whatever. I quite liked that banality of crime element to it.
Yeah, very much. And what makes it Icelandic, actually, is, so if we look at alcohol as a thing in Iceland, it's state-controlled. So I can't remember whether we've spoken about it before, but you can only buy alcohol in Iceland at state-run shops called Vinbúðin. So you can't go into a supermarket and buy alcohol. You can't pop anywhere other than these certain stores to buy your wine, your spirits, your beer, unless it's less than 2.2% or something.
Is that to control the industry, I guess?
I guess so. And it means that everyone's paying the same amount for everything, although it is very expensive. So I think there's your reason, isn't it? It may not be illegal, but it's certainly too expensive to to perhaps drink to the level that you might want. So bringing in cheap booze and selling it on the black market is probably quite a good idea.
Yeah. You convinced yourself there.
I think I have, yeah.
Ingvar. Ég skítrættu við þetta.
Þú hefur gert þetta 100 sinnum. Einn túr til Rotterdam.
So, like I said, it's a bit of a twisty film. Do you think we could quickly try and run through the stages of what happens? Because it is quite complex.
We can try.
Okay. So let's try and do a sort of ping pong game here of moments that happen and see how far we get. So, okay, I'll start with something very simple. The first thing we see is some sort of deal gone wrong with a gangster and some guy running away scared for his life.
That guy running away for his life, it turns out to be Arne, who we find out is the brother-in-law of this guy Christopher, and he has a family, as you say, barely holding it together, but we get a sense that they're a tight-knit family, pretty close.
Yeah, and it turns out that Arne had tried to smuggle something into the country. Christopher also used to do it, and his family are pretty poor.
Christopher's friend, Steingrimur, is kind of sniffing around the family, helping them out with stuff, though. But does he have some other motivation?
Yeah, he seems a bit creepy, doesn't he?
He seems a bit creepy.
So Steingrimur helps out a lot. He offers him a fridge, he offers him money, but he also says maybe Christopher should go and do one last booze run and get some money for the family, and he'll split it 50-50.
So he arranges it. He gets him a job on this boat, captained by a kind of quite traditional, grumpy old captain. And Christopher gets on board and finds that all the people on board are kind of his mates, really, who are in on the hustle as well.
Yeah. And then they all run around the ship trying to find somewhere to hide all the stuff. And then we get to Rotterdam, where Arne steals the money that's supposed to go to the guy who's selling them the booze. And Jensen and Christopher go to a warehouse that is empty. So then they decide to go somewhere else and end up with some Dutch gangster guy.
Oh, of course. Now we're on to the Dutch gangsters. So the Dutch gangster basically says, you have to do this job for me. Gets them to pretend to be road workers while they essentially rob a transit van, which turns out has a big painting in it, which I think is meant to be a Jackson Pollock,
I would say so, yeah.
And anyway, that goes wrong. There's a big shootout, and then Christopher and his mate end up with this painting, flee back to the ship.
Yep, and they get back to the ship without Arne, who had run off previously. Turns out he's there. He had smuggled in drugs. Christopher's not happy about that. So they have to come up with a plan to get the drugs and the booze back from Rotterdam to Iceland without being rumbled by the captain, who 100% knows that they're stealing something. And he uses the rest of the crew to help him with that.
In the meantime, back in Iceland, Christopher's wife Iris has been threatened by this kind of gang of thugs, really, and she's leaning on Steingrimur to kind of protect her and help her and support her, but he's becoming increasingly creepy. I would say attached. Clearly he's got romantic feelings for her, and it's all getting a bit intense.
And then that story's kind of weird because Steingrimur gets Iris to move in with him as the gangsters are making their moves and threatening Iris. But what we don't realise is that Steingrimur's kind of behind it, and he is manoeuvring Iris to get close to him because he still fancies her, because it seems like they were once a thing and he wants her back.
Yeah, so the ferry is almost back in Reykjavik, but Iris is aware that the situation with Steingrimur is getting a bit uncomfortable. They have a kind of showdown in which he slams a door open. She's behind it, falls, hits her head on the radiator, and is, by all accounts, seemingly dead.
Yep. And this is happening at the exact same time. Like you said, the ferry's pulling in. There's helicopters, the police, the customs are all there waiting for them. But there's nothing on board the ship that they can find except for a bottle with a picture of the captain and a load of booze in it. And so Christopher walks off the ship completely fine, no arrests or anything, leaving us wondering what the fuck has happened to all the booze and the drugs. And has the sort of smuggling worked? Where is everything?
So then he meets up with Erika and his gang and says, you know what, fine. It's a kind of unhappy alliance. Fine, I'll take you to the drugs. I've put them in my mate's house. Come with me. So they go there. We obviously find out that it's actually the captain's house. They start getting all the drugs out. Christopher legs it, calls the police, and the captain and Erika and his gang all look like they've been in on it together. And they're arrested as a smuggling ring.
Yep. So Christopher runs off and he wants to get to Iris because he has a feeling he knows Steingrim has double-crossed him and that he's no good for Iris. He can't find him at the flat. He can't find him at Steingrim's apartment. So he goes to his workplace on the building site where Steingrim has wrapped Iris in plastic and dumped her body in the foundations of a house and is attempting to cover her in concrete.
Wild. But as the concrete is literally coming out of the concrete mixer, Christopher calls Iris. Her phone goes off and he's like, wait a minute. Manages to drag her out of the concrete and somehow she's alive. Very unrealistic, but fine.
And then cut to the sea where a load of salt bags are finally dissolved, leaving the booze to rise to the surface and get collected by Christopher's friends. And the final shot is Christopher and Iris in a new house, painting the walls, living a happy life, using the Jackson Pollock painting as, protection for the floor. End. Wow.
A lot went on, basically.
It's a lot, and we didn't cover half of the stuff that happened there. So, it is a basic story, but that just took us like 5 minutes to explain, in not very much detail, the plot. Having gone through that plot, do you have any sort of moments or questions or anything you want to talk about?
Yeah, one question.
Okay, one question.
At the end, we see them collecting all the booze, as you say. They'd hidden it in the sea. But my first question is, they didn't buy any booze in Rotterdam anyway, so where did this booze come from? Because Arnold ran off with the money, correct?
Correct.
To buy the ecstasy.
Correct.
They then took part in this accidental art heist. When did the booze get taken hold of?
Okay, so this is the hilarious thing, is that Hoogland, the scary Dutch gangster, he lets them load the van with the booze before he's taken any of the money. So when they open the bag to find...
Terrible gangstering.
I mean, yeah, surely the first thing you do is make sure the bag is full of money. Anyway, he doesn't do that. So the van is full, and when Christopher and Jensen get back to the van with the Jackson Pollock, they just cover up the booze with the painting and drive the van to the docks.
I understand now. Thank you for explaining that.
You're welcome. Like you say, it's a twisty-turny film. There's all sorts going on, and it is fast-paced. It's kinetic. It's busy.
Next question.
Okay.
I thought I only had one.
Well, this is great. We'll just go through and I'll answer all your questions.
How, obviously the ecstasy was in the captain's car.
Yeah.
Why did the captain have his car aboard the ship?
So he didn't.
I sound like a moron.
The ecstasy was inside the Hoover, which at the start of the film, we see his wife take the Hoover out the car, bring it onto the ship, and assuming Christopher put the ecstasy back into the Hoover before they docked in Reykjavik, the Hoover was then moved to the captain's car to drive home.
So the captain just brought his own Hoover aboard with him then?
I guess so.
You say it like that makes any more sense.
Well, there was that moment when they're all getting on the ship at the start when the captain's like, move this thing and move that thing and...
Bring my Hoover me.
Yeah, help get the carpet cleaner on board. I'm like, okay, random moment to point out. But he does. There is a Hoover, and it does get filled with ecstasy, and it does end up back at his house.
Fine.
Hjálpið svo henni Gretju með teppaþinsvélina. Það er svo út undirbúa brottför.
It's a plot contrivance, but it's kind of funny.
Yeah, it is good fun.
You know, the whole thing is pretty funny, actually. And you were talking about how you're expecting this film to be an action, much more glossy type of thriller. Well, this got turned into a Hollywood movie starring Mark Wahlberg called Contraband, directed by Baltasar Kormákur in the end, but written by someone else. And there were lots of things changed, like they're not smuggling booze into America because why would you need to do that? And I don't know if I've seen it. It's possible, but it's certainly glossy, focuses way more on the action, and doesn't look funny at all. The trailer is the most po-faced trailer you've ever seen, and the reviews of that are piss poor, to say the least.
I think part of the charm of this film is that it's slightly scruffy, and as we say, slightly kind of low rent. And I mean that as a compliment. Like, it's like about ordinary people rather than it being incredibly, as you say, Hollywood shootouts and really glossy. I mean, there is one shootout, but
there is, and it's interesting you bring up guns because Eiríkur doesn't have a gun. The only Icelandic gangster in the film and his little thugs, they fight people with their fists, but they certainly don't have any guns because that's not Iceland. And I think the writers knew that, and so they didn't want to go over the top with the whole Iceland stuff because if it doesn't ring true, then you know it's not going to appeal to the Icelandic viewers. And of course, this was made in 2008, before anything had really broken through into the international market. Maybe Jar City had shown they could do it, but to keep things sort of realistic, they left the guns out of the Reykjavik side of things. But when they arrived in Rotterdam, then we can have a kind of Hollywood gangster with the guns and the shootout, like you say, with the police when things go absolutely crazy.
He made me laugh, the Dutch gangster, because he was quite a pencil portrait of a gangster.
Pretty much.
You know, swaggering and with this kind of weird cod American accent. It was kind of like Dutch American. I guess that's quite often, I think if Dutch and German people learn English, they often have more of an American twang because he was speaking English. I don't know. He was very much like a classic gangster.
Yeah, he was drawn as typical gangster guy, even though all he is doing is selling some alcohol. Although, and then obviously he does go and raid a van with a priceless work of art.
Yeah, it's quite kind of too disparate. He had quite a busy day on that day, didn't he?
Yeah.
A little booze smuggling deal in the morning, and then within a couple of hours, a quite major international art heist.
Yeah. And as if he'd planned it without 2 extra people.
Yeah.
Like, we do need 2 people to set up a fake roadblock. And you just happen to be here. Perfect. But, that's fine.
Yeah.
I don't know how the police got there so fast, but that's okay as well.
It's one of those films, isn't it, where don't dig into the intricacies of real events.
No.
Because it all would quite quickly fall apart. But that's not the charm of it. The charm is just the fun.
It is. It's fun. It races along. You're with Christopher because he is a likable character. He is funny. He's not quite as suave as Danny Ocean, but he's someone to root for, like you say, and he's funny, and he clearly knows what he's doing. Not that we realise it until the very end. Yeah, these are people that are fun to watch.
I think, like you say, the people that we're rooting for are kind of likeable rogues, and the guys on the boat, we've got a rogues gallery, really, haven't we? Of some are a bit useless, some are a bit canny, in quite a kind of prison drama-y type of way,
Yeah, they're a gang of crooks. They know each other well. They've got this relationship with each other. They're all mates. Yeah, and you can feel it.
So I think the likable characters are are quite likeable, and the baddies are quite unlikable. As in, we've got Erica, who's almost like a kind of spoiled child, head of this gang of thugs, showing off really and trying to look more intimidating, I think, than maybe he is.
He's got a leather jacket on.
Such a 2000s leather jacket as well.
Yeah.
But we also have Steingrimur, who I think Ingvar Sigurðsson does a really good job of that kind of slightly creepy, I'm your friend, I'm trying to help you. Actually, I'm going to be a creep.
Well, Steingrimur is kind of the most complex character here, because we've got Christopher, who's, okay, he's got a shady past, but he has a family and he's settled down and he just wants his classic one last job and then he's out. And we've got his wife, who's, his wife, and she's the mother and doing what she can for the family.
And I thought she was a good character, actually, in terms of, with my feminist hat on, she was not too much of a simpering at-home wife. She was saying, don't do this stupid drug deal, think of your family. But she wasn't just a mother. She had a bit of something to her.
Yeah, and we see her working. It's not like she just exists to be the wife in that respect. She has a bigger role than that, doesn't she? And there is a tendency in Hollywood films to get rid of the love interest or the wife very early on in films like this.
Yeah.
They call it fridging. Is this
really?
Yeah, so it all comes from.
There is some fridge chat in this film, but I think you mean different type.
That's very true, actually. Maybe that's an internal joke. But so the term fridging comes from a comic book, I think, where the hero's love interest is killed right at the start and it sets the plot in motion. And if you watch a lot of Hollywood films, that happens so much that the main female character has no agency. She just exists to die to move the plot along. And actually, that doesn't happen here. I know Iris nearly dies, but she doesn't. And actually, she is kind of crucial to the plot, actually.
I'm trying to think of examples of fridging, and all I can think of is John Wick, but it's a dog that gets fridged.
They fridge the bloody dog. Yeah, I think Deadpool does it, actually. I can't think of any other examples off the top of my head.
No, but there are. I know, it's a trope, isn't it?
It is a trope, and I'm glad that didn't happen here.
Hvað gangi?
Þetta ná í þig. Ég búin að ráða maður þetta, boss.
Ertu eitthvað bilaður?
Hvað stífilinn minn?
Kristoffer. Kristoffer. Ég ætla ekki að heimsækja þig aftur á hraunið.
Ég ekkert á leiðin á hraunið. Þetta öðruvísi núna, ég edrú.
Viljið vera til friðs? Þú ert í vinnu.
Þetta ekki vinna, þetta kjaftari. Ég fucking húsvörður á bíl. Þetta bara einn túr, Iris. Ég verð að gera þetta. Svo það búið, ég lofa því.
Það alltaf sama ruglið. Skúli, hvað varst að gera? Egill, komdu. Kristoffer. Það kemur ekkert til greina að þú farir inn í djöfusins túr.
But should we talk about Steingrimur? Because, yeah, like you say, Ingvar Sigurðsson does such a good job of being this friend. And he does come across like a friend, but also the whole time there's just something a bit wrong about him. He obviously has a thing for Iris, but we're like, okay, well, they must have moved past that and they must be aware that he once liked Iris, and I think we do find out that they had a thing once. But the fact that he literally double crosses his best mate, who he's at AA with, to get with his wife is just quite a big and nasty thing to do.
I quite like a storyline as well in the crime drama that isn't just like crime / money motivated. Sometimes their people's only motivation is that he would have a deal with a different, drug dealer or whatever.
Yeah.
But I quite like it when you throw in a emotional motive, that he just is in love with her and wants her back, really.
Yeah, and will do anything for
also, it. He's very he had a general weird vibe. Like, he had very much a kind of dad fleece vibe, which was not didn't go that well in my mind with drug dealing and shady criminal connections. But that worked quite well in a way because he looked like the safe. Christopher, had his little man bracelet and a couple of tattoos to make him look like a badass, like a bit of a rogue, as we've said. Can't keep down a job and doesn't have any money for his family. Steingrimur obviously had more money. He seems more sensible, more reliable, more dependable, but actually he's the real creep.
Well, that's it. And actually, he's not that shady, because he's not involved with the drugs as far as I can tell.
But he's like has connections with all the...
with the one gangster. Yeah, it's true. And casting Ingvar Sigurðsson is quite a good bit of casting, really, because you don't expect him to be the bad guy, especially after watching Jar City, where he is literally the good guy. He might be a bit grumpy, but he's the good guy. He's solving the crimes. He's not committing them and all of that kind of thing. So, yeah, he's great, isn't he?
Hvað segirðu? Erum við með eitthvað í dettifossi frá Rotterdam?
Hvað vilt þú vita það? Já, jú, það getur bara það.
Hvað er það mikið?
Svona 25-30 milljónir á götunni.
Hver er með þetta?
Nýrstrákur, Arnaldur. Hvað þekkjur hann?
Þetta kom út í algjörðu rugl.
So we talked about the gangsters, and that's kind of the harsher side of this film. We've got guns, we've got people beating people up, gangsters, Erika driving a car through the window of Iris's hairdressers, which is pretty big action for an Icelandic film, really, that we've seen. We haven't seen much of that kind of craziness before. But one of the themes that we did pick up on, especially in the first series, is that kind of dry, dark humour that runs through a lot of the films. And here we have so much humour. Were there any moments that you thought were particularly funny?
Well, I really enjoyed, in general, the kind of cat and mouse game on the boat, where clearly the captain knows.
Oh, he 100% knows.
He knows that the crew are trying to do this smuggling mission, and he's just trying to thwart them in every way, and they're trying to thwart him.
Yeah.
So there's, the opening moment where he basically gets on board and turns on all of the speakers this kind of Icelandic accordion music.
It goes from surf music, which is out of place in itself, but they kind of like it, into a sea shanty.
Yeah, and you can see them all go, oh God, the captain's on board.
Yeah.
There's also an incident with, muddy boots on deck, which, I don't understand how the shoes are getting muddy when all they've been on is on board a boat. There's no mud anywhere.
I don't think I can argue with that, unless it's oil, but it doesn't look like oil. But all the stuff that around the captain is so funny.
It did have a good kind of capery feel when they're trying to find all these places on the boat that they can stash the booze. And he's always turning around the corner and trying to find them. And they're all saying, oh, Christopher is just in the other room. Goes to the other room and they say, oh no, I think he was over there.
It's perfect. It's so funny. And it happens, you see them on the way to Rotterdam, you see them on the way back. And that payoff when Christopher's finally in the kitchen is just perfect. Because the captain's at his wit's end. He's like, he's not here, is he? And then there he is, putting on his apron. It's just brilliant. So funny.
Hvar Christopher?
Hann inni í messa.
Christopher hérna?
Hann ekki inn í eldhúsi?
Þetta mér?
Já. Það þarf að hreinsa teppin í brúnni.
Akkurat núna?
Já, núna strax.
I also enjoyed the Jackson Pollock kind of jokes, where they obviously end up with this stolen painting, which might be worth more than...
Oh, it's likely worth a lot more than the booze that they've just
any bag of drugs.
Yeah.
And they obviously have no understanding of the value of it, so they just use it as a blanket, essentially, to cover all the booze they're smuggling. And we see them drive past a sign that says, modern American art exhibition with a picture of the painting they've just stolen on it. And of course, that final moment, the joke comes back again.
I love, those running jokes are just perfect. They're not necessarily laugh out loud, but they're that undercurrent of
witty.
Yeah, very witty. And that scene when they're with Hoogland and they've got all the booze and Jensen realizes that they haven't got any money, so he's like, run, jumps in the van, drives the van straight into the garage door. It was just classic slapstick, but so funny. And even Hoogland, the gangster's just like, what are you doing? Fucking Icelanders. Like, he doesn't even really react. Just like, you're an idiot.
And even the car, there's a bit more car slapstick later as well, isn't there, where they drive the car into the shipping container and then realise that they can't actually get out because the doors are too tightly packed. So I think after so many films we've seen that have been quite considered, Lamb being a great example, A White White Day for another example, really profound, slow, thoughtful pieces. It is quite refreshing to have something that just whips along with an entertaining plot and not really anything to think about beyond that. Yes.
So I think that humour, a lot of that humour, probably comes from the director, Óskar Jónasson, because he wrote the film with Arnaldur and Indriðason, who knows his crime very well. Perhaps not so much the humour. As far as I can remember, there's not a lot of humour in the Erlander books, and certainly not in Jar City. But Jónasson is famous mostly for doing comedy. So I haven't seen this, but there's a film from the 90s, his first feature film, called Sodoma Reykjavik, which was otherwise known as Remote Control, which has become some sort of, massively kind of cult Icelandic comedy. And he worked in a lot of television comedy and stuff. And then apparently this film was a very big right turn for him. Like, no one expected him to suddenly do a crime thriller. But I think the humour must come from him, I assume. We probably won't cover Remote Control because it's not noughties, but good to know that that's where he's come from. Another fact for you, Christopher's two sons, both Baltasar Kormákur's real sons.
Oh, okay. Well, they definitely had an easy dynamic, didn't they?
Yeah, they're not in it much, but it is very relaxed when they're shopping, when they say goodbye to Dad. It felt very much like they must know him well. We have seen, so he's got 3 sons, those 2, and then another much older son who we did briefly see in 101 Reykjavik, uncredited, forget who he plays, but he's there, and he's much better known for appearing in Katla and Trapped. He plays a very pivotal role in the first series of Trapped, actually. His name is Baltasar Semper. So I'm sure we'll be seeing him again at some point, if indeed he decides to keep acting, because I know he's, as they all do, everyone works multiple jobs, and he's certainly helped out directing, assistant producing, special effecting, and all of that kind of thing. So I just thought that was fun to see a bit of family work going on. And final fact for you, this was Iceland's entry for the Oscars.
Love that.
In whatever year it was, 2009 probably. And like you say, it doesn't really feel like an Oscar entry, does it? Especially when you think about how Lamb was this year's Oscar entry. Unsurprisingly, it didn't make it to the shortlist, to actually be considered to win. But when you hear what was nominated and what won that year, it's very easy to see why. So it was up against Michael Haneke's The White Ribbon from Germany, the French film A Prophet with Tahar Rahim, and the film that won was The Secret in Their Eyes, the Argentinian film, which again is absolutely brilliant, although it does have some dodgy old age makeup in it towards the end, from what I can remember. But yes, great that it got submitted, but unsurprising that it didn't quite make the list.
Better luck next time.
So Svein, who is on the ship?
Yep, one of our kind of merry accomplices.
Yes. Well, he's played by an actor called Magnus Jónsson, who got in touch with us via our Instagram page, which is Kvikmyndapod on Instagram. KVIKMYNDAPOD. And he got in touch to say he'd made a film and would we like to see it and we'd like to talk about it. And since he popped up in Reykjavik-Rotterdam, I thought, why not have a quick chat about it now?
Yeah, so we watched it, didn't we?
We did. This is a film by Magnus Jónasson. He directed it, like I say, he wrote it. He stars in it. He doesn't star, he's in it. He produced it, he did the music, he did the costumes, he edited the sound, he did the colour grade. This guy...
A one-man band.
It's incredible. And it was filmed over 9 days. And do you want to give us sort of the story of Taka Film, Take 5?
So it's a great premise. It's a premise that really appeals to me. So 5 leading lights of the film and the artistic scene. So we have an actor, we have a screenwriter, we have a director, a questionable art guy, and an eminent musician. Mm-hmm. All wake up in some abandoned barn as attached to a farmhouse, and they have a letter that says, "You've been kidnapped, you have to make a film with me."
How are you going to fight me with no sword?
Leikarar, þeir mæta alltaf á sýningar, við erum aldrei veik, aldrei.
Þau fengu bréf.
Heyrðu, ég er í tökum. Ég er í miðjum tökum. Það er allir að leita mér allt, ég á að vera mættur á sett, skilur mig?
Þau fengu líka bréf.
Hver? Bréf? Ég nenni ekki sem helvitis leikjum! Hleyptu okkur út, helvita! Einu sinni bjó fjölskylda í afskekktri vík á Vestfjörðum.
Ertu ekki að djóka í mér þetta? Þú sýnir sem eitthvað fucking djók og við sváfum að þetta nú!
So it turns out that basically this guy has been living on his own. He's possibly had a slightly strange childhood, and he communicates. He lives for movies.
Yes.
He's obsessed with old movies. He speaks as if he was in an old movie and basically only repeats lines from old movies. And he's got this grand dream of creating this amazing film, hence why he's kidnapped them all. They can't escape, else they'll be electrocuted. Mechanisms, don't worry about it. And that's basically it. They have to kind of do a DIY home movie, very B-movie type of situation.
Yeah. It's quite incredible, really. It's like Saw, but for films.
I mean, it's a great premise.
Yeah. And so it's kind of mad. Like you say, the main character, Mr. R, I wasn't initially sure whether he had split personality disorder or what, because he's constantly repeating lines from classic films, because of course we see that he was raised mostly by his mum, and when things were bad she would turn to film along with him and sort of just take comfort in film. And what I really liked about this film actually is how kind of it relates to our podcast, in that this guy finds comfort in film. He finds the best in those movies that he watches, and he has a passion for it. And it's just, I mean, that's what I hope that we are sort of conveying through this podcast, is our passion for the films that we watch.
And the listeners are our kidnappees who are forced to come on this journey with us. I thought that there were quite nicely drawn caricatures. I think it's fair to say caricature. They're kind of stock characters.
Yes, exactly.
So we have the kind of moody, sultry musician, but again we find out he has a bit more depth. We have the kind of farty director, and I mean literally farty, because he's got some gastrointestinal issue, who's just makes big action blockbusters and wants bash, crank, wallop. We have the actress who takes herself super seriously and is a method
an actor,
actress.
Darling.
An actor. So I thought all of those were quite fun, and it's full of jokes. It's quite funny, isn't it?
It is quite funny, yeah. I wasn't initially sure with the farts. I was like, you can't sustain a film on fart gags. Like, I love a fart gag, but I if that's all this is, I'm not sure. But it wasn't. Like I said, it's about film, and you talked about the director there who makes these big Hollywood rip-offs, which in our experience isn't something that Iceland really does. Until now, with Leynilögur, Cop Secret, we haven't really seen a Hollywood-style movie come out from Iceland. But the actress sort of looks down on him for that. She's super serious. And I really just love that kind of dichotomy of the two of them just sort of butting heads with these two interpretations of what film should be, because it can all exist, as we've seen on the podcast.
And there was also the kind of joyous reveling in the DIY-ness of it all. So obviously the film they make is meant to be quite crap, but kind of getting swept up in that, and you know, it's like the team's all back together, and they forge friendships, and
that's it. You see the relationships building, and everyone by the end has learned to work together, and
they're all glad they were kidnapped in the end.
I am a princess, and I want to be your friend.
Ok, ég bara á ekki orð. Hver vélin?
I really liked watching the video of the film they were making. I mean, it made absolutely no sense. And that was quite a funny recurring joke that Mr. R kept adding more and more sort of story to this really complex kind of, I'm not even sure, it sounded like a soap opera, as they say. It began sounding a bit like I Remember You, with this remote village that's been abandoned in wherever, the West Fjords, in the snow, and you can't get to it other than by boat. I was like, oh, this is familiar territory. Unfortunately, they couldn't recreate that in a barn, could they? But no, it was really fun to watch those lo-fi scenes. It reminded me a bit of, what's that Michel Gondry film with Jack Black? Be Kind, Rewind, where they lose all the tapes or something and they recreate the films in a Michel Gondry style way. It just sort of reminded me of that. And the whole thing was just a glorious kind of fun embrace of film as an art form, wasn't it?
Yeah, totally. That's exactly what it was.
So thank you, Magnus, for sharing your film with us. That's Taka Film, and it can be found on Vimeo, where you can rent or buy it. And I will put a link to that in the show notes. And we really enjoyed it. It's a low-budget, lo-fi movie, but as we say, and as the film would say, if you can make a film, if you want to make a film, it is possible. And this podcast is all about kind of exploring all the varieties of films coming out of Iceland. So thank you very much for that. You know what? Reykjavik-Rotterdam being so kinetic, fun and funny has absolutely inspired me to go and rewatch the Oceans trilogy, and also reminded me of the fantastic Danish film set aboard a container ship, A Hijacking from 2012. Slightly more intense, but amazing nonetheless. Next week we head back to the Icelandic countryside. Told you we would. For Benedict Erlingson's Of Horses and Men. It's currently available to rent or buy on Amazon or Apple, and I'll post links for the film on our social media channels. Speaking of which, we're at Kvikmyndapod on Instagram and Twitter, and if you could leave us a lovely rating and review at Apple and Spotify, we'd be immensely grateful. See you next week. Takk og bless. Thanks and goodbye.